Dr. Porter, what does brain fitness actually mean? And how is it different maybe from our perception or idea of traditional mental health?
Well, a lot of people think mental health is a psychological problem. It is to some degree, but it's a physiological problem. People aren't moving and breathing. Our nervous system occupies the whole body, but 70% of it is our brain. So people don't realize that if you don't work out your brain, and working out physically does do that. You create BDNF and it does create neuroplasticity. But brain fitness is being able to move between those physiological states. Let's say you have to run because of something, or you have to fight, or you have to calm down and relax. Is your body willing to do that? One way you know that you don't have the resilience you need is first thing in the morning you need coffee. There's no reason you need coffee first thing in the morning, and I'm going to explain that to the listeners, because in the morning you wake up with high cortisol, dopamine, norepinephrine, and all these things, all these neurochemicals are waking you up. Now, when you drink a cup of coffee, you just crush that. You just blocked your body's natural ability, because the brain is inherently lazy. So it says, okay, you're going to drink coffee. That's fine. I don't have to make this norepinephrine, cortisol, dopamine, and then what happens is you become dependent upon it. Now, I'm not against coffee. I think you should drink it maybe in your midday, maybe 10 or 11 o'clock, maybe at 2 o'clock in the afternoon if you're going to drink it, because then you can get a lift, because your cortisol level drops when you wake up. By 2 o'clock, your temperature drops 2 degrees and your cortisol level tanks. That's why you don't get much done in the afternoon. We did a Google study, and we were trying to show them because of burnout. A lot of these programmers that after COVID, they went back in the office and they said, hell, I don't want to do this. This is crazy. This is too much stress. And they said, what can you do? And I said, have them do a BrainTap session at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They said, why? I go, because everybody loses 2 degrees. It's a psychological low in the body. If your nervous system is out of balance, if you don't have good brain fitness, you can't bounce back. Your afternoon becomes just, and so what we did, at first they wouldn't do it. I said, give me 2 weeks and I guarantee you'll not stop doing it. At the end of 2 weeks, their sleep score improved 70%, their happiness score 54%. But the biggest thing for Google was 26% more work done on the days they took 20-minute break. So that means, how sharp you are in the morning, you're fresh, whatever. You should be that way all the time. My dad was a Silva instructor, the Silva method. So I grew up teaching me how to use my mind and to do different things. Of course, I used it for sports because I'm a guy, so I used it to become a 3-sport captain, get a college scholarship and all those things. And at the time when I did it in the 70s, we were kind of, Fruit Loops. Nobody ever did any visualizations and relaxation techniques. Although when I went to Ferris State, but when I went to U of M's football camp, Dana Coyne, who held the record at that time of the most extra points ever kicked, he took us all through visualization exercises. And I went, oh, my dad's not full of it. Maybe there is something to that. And so I started using it even more because, when you see these professionals using it, it's a big thing. So a lot of people do some forms of brain fitness, like breathing techniques are a good form of brain fitness, walking, just giving yourself a break away from things they might call mindfulness. What we do, and we'll talk a little bit, I'm sure, further on, is we use technology to get the brain into the perfect state to be in these states of visualization. We call it alpha and theta, or your intuitive and inventive mind. You need to be in those states of consciousness to be able to do these things. So that's what we train people to do.
Yeah, it's great. It gives us a lot to unpack here and, walk through throughout this conversation. I have experienced firsthand about 6 years ago, I went through a complete coffee fast. I did like 60 days without it. Like I was the guy, the coffee pot started like 15 minutes before the alarm clock went off. So it was ready like first thing. And then I got out of it, and now as an athlete, former athlete, like competed in bodybuilding, played sports much like yourself growing up. I look at it now more as a performance enhancer. And I think that's kind of what you're saying there, right? Like it shouldn't be the requirement to get your day started. You should be able to pull that lever, like when you need to kind of focus in on something, whether it's physical, mental, cognitively, maybe a session of deep work. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna have a little bit of caffeine here, maybe right before the conversation that I was having with you, like had a small bit of caffeine paired with some other nootropics, just kind of get me in the mental state that I need. So I love that and definitely, experience it firsthand. You said one sign of peak maybe brain fitness is the ability to move through these physiological states. Can you walk us through what those different physiological states are that we...
Let's say somebody pulls in front of you in traffic. Do you immediately tell them they're number one, get all upset and angry, and this anger stays with you and the next person you see gets it dumped on them? That's dysregulation. Most people don't get stuck in the positive states, they get stuck in the negative states. Like, let's say you get some bad news. Yeah, well, we work with Alex Guerra, Tom Brady's coach, because Tom Brady's a BrainTap user. And I asked him, I said, how did you get Tom to come back, after he threw those interceptions? He said, I told him you get 15 seconds to think about that bad memory and get over it. Because what happens, those quarterbacks, they're in a high pressure situation. They can't take that. They threw an interception. So what? He threw 3 more touchdowns. So it's like, you just got to go out there and make it up. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have setbacks. How is your body regulating? Do you get too depressed? And do you get angry at just anything? These are dysregulations of the nerves. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be envious. All these real emotions. The problem is, think of your body. It's a transducer. It holds energy and discharges that energy. So when you're holding that energy, if you're a 90-watt light bulb and you're burning at 110 all the time because your inflammation, these are physical markers, and then you have this emotional outburst. Emotion is energy in motion. But negative emotions, there's one thing they all have in common: no breath. If you notice somebody who's angry, they can't breathe. When you're in love or you're in harmony or you're doing something you really enjoy, you breathe easily. So we teach people how to breathe through. Breathing is a direct connect to your nervous system. And you can alter your nervous system so easily with your breath. So part of the BrainTap training is actually teaching you how to breathe again. Most people hold their breath. Next time you're in a conversation with somebody, notice they hold their breath all the time. And then they go, they'll catch themselves. Well, that's because their primitive brain says, hey, we need some oxygen down here, man. Breathe, and so the brain has to do that. But you can train the brain just like you would as an athlete. You don't, in practice, you might not play at the same level as in the game, but to the degree you can and face all those situations, then we call that neural pruning. So you have brain pruning. So you already have the thoughts in your mind of what you're going to do. Now you get in a game situation, which is life. Life is a game. So if you're playing it at the highest level, you don't want to let other people affect your nervous system by making you angry. And there's a saying, he who angers you conquers you. So if you kind of live your life that way, if you give your power to another. When my kids were younger, it was funny. We used to go on these big vacations because my wife always bragged up her dad's vacation. So I had to beat them, in that. So we'd go on these 6-week vacations and, 2 kids. And so they would argue. And they said, why are you giving her your remote control? So that became the big joke in the house. And they said, what do you mean? I said, if I make you angry, that means I can turn you off. Just point my remote control at you and turn you off. So many people give other people their remote control. And brain regulation means I don't care what you say about me or do about me. It's within me to hold that poise, that confidence. And the days of social media, unfortunately, if everybody lived the life on social media, we wouldn't have a problem. But the problem is that, nobody's broadcasting their bad news. Which is good. But then people look at it and they get envious. They start thinking, oh, wow, if they're doing it, I should be able to do it. But you are actually in a competition with yourself. There's no one else. This is the one man or one woman sport, and nobody else can run your race. No one else can, sleep your sleep, eat your foods. You're the one keeping score. You can have a lot of coaches, and I think everybody needs a coach, but they can't go on the field and play for you. That's what my coach has always said. I can teach you what to do, but I can't get on the field and play for you. So that's where the brain training comes in. And could you imagine, Frank, going to a movie and they never rehearsed, but they got out there on the screen and you started filming them? Well, people do this every day in their life. They never do any brain priming. So this priming happens where you prime your day. Who are you going to see? What are you going to talk about? How are you going to discuss it? How are you going to end your day? How's your evening going to be? You plan all that out so that the brain, what you think about, you bring about. So as you think about these things, your brain continues to. It's just like buying a new car. I'm sure you've driven off the lot and you said, I didn't know there were this many of these cars out here, because they weren't in there's a part of the brain called the default mode network, or the reticular activating system. And it's always scanning your environment for things that you like, things that is this safe? Am I okay? Can I challenge this? Can I, should I run? Should I flee? It's always, now this is something that might shock your listeners, because in 2015, when you talk about superhuman, that's why I thought I'd bring this up. In 2015, they discovered a new part of the human anatomy. Before 2015, No one on earth had a physiology book that had the lymphatic system that went beyond the neck. If you go back into most physiology books, they stop there. But in 2015, they discovered something. They discovered that when you reach level 4 sleep, a part of your body activates like a superhuman and detoxes your brain. If you don't reach that level 4 sleep, now with 2/3 of the world that isn't sleeping, if you're not sleeping, you don't have good brain fitness. You should be able to sleep on any schedule, anywhere, anytime when it's time to sleep. We called it in Silva sleep and wake control. So you can train your brain to do this. It's just a brainwave. It's like turning a dial in your radio. And so when you think about the way in which the body works. Now, one other thing, just since we're going to try to shock the listeners a little bit here. You know, in 2003, they mapped the human genome. You heard that, right? They mapped the genome. Everybody's got DNA kits, and you can find out who your ancestors are and who your illegitimate brothers and sisters are. Whatever you're doing out there, you know, it's all out there now. You know, you find this all out. But the reality is they only map 1% of it. Could you imagine going through college and you want to take your final exams and say, I only answered 1% of the questions. Can I get my degree? No. But in 2018, they discovered something else, something that changed, really rocked the world of science and neuroscience, especially, that every 40 seconds, every DNA pair in your body is changing based on everything, based on the environment, based on the food you consume, the water you drink, the thoughts you think. Mostly the first filter for all of this is your mindset. Do you look at life as a challenge? Is there a setback, something going on, and you fold up like an accordion, or do you step up to it? You know, the old saying is, do you run from the fire, or do you run toward the fire to help the people out? You know, what's your mindset? What they found was people that look at life as an optimist, they actually produce 200 times more light at the cellular level. And why is that important for the listener? Every cell of your body has something called mitochondria. This is not only in the brain or in the eyes. When we use light therapy, it's because hemoglobin absorbs that light energy, circulates it through the body, finds the cell that it's about to die or needs repair. Maybe you just worked out, and it's going to feed that cell light energy. In the middle of that cell, that mitochondria, just imagine a little guy in there with a clock, and every time he moves his hand around, it spits out an ATP. ATP is the currency of the body. Think of it as without that, you can't transact information in the body. So this is what all the foods we consume, all the water we drink, all the air we breathe, that's what we're trying to make. But light bypasses all that. It makes it at the cell. So there's no delivery system. Boom, right there. So what we showed was with light therapy, you can have 32 times more ATP production. So we want to deliver to the brain, because the brain is the central processing unit. It's what moves the muscles. It's what moves the ligaments. It's what moves the bones. You know, you can have big, strong muscles, but if your brain isn't working, who cares? You know, you can live to be 120, but somebody else is, you know, changing your diaper. That doesn't work for me. You know, I want to be able to do those things. So and it's really an energy equation. So when people think about, and that's why exercise, and there's three forms of brain fitness that I always tell people. There's really 4, but I'll mention the 4th just slightly because some people get confused about it. Number 1 is physical movement. You have to move your body. If you don't move your body, and really resistant training is best, because as we age, unfortunately, gravity gets us and we lose muscle. So muscles are little chemical factories that make all those great neurotransmitters we need in our gut, but we need muscles to help them work. Without the muscles, we can't make the serotonin, the dopamine, the GABA, everything we need to flow through the day and have this optimized thinking. Now, when you think about number two is you can't outthink a bad diet. You've got to eat right. You know, and when I tell people, they go, what should I eat? What's going to affect my DNA? Everything affects it. So whatever you put in is going to affect it, because it's giving off electrical charge, information in form of proteins, fats, and fiber, hopefully good foods. But if it's bad foods, the body is going to have to rob your body to digest those foods. So you have to start thinking, gosh, is it worth it? And sometimes it is. It's a birthday party, or you're celebrating with family, so you might have a drink or something like that. But it's not all the time. You know, it's something you do occasionally. The body can handle it. But when we get the assault we have on our brains right now, I mean, with my kids also, I told them, I said, you can eat anything you want as long as you can read it. So my daughter got really good at reading, so but it's one of those things where it's like, if you can't read it, you can't eat it. I always tell people, if it comes in a can, bottle, or wrapper with ingredients you can't read, you can't digest it. It's going to be a toxic load on the body. So traumas, thoughts, and toxins are the death call of the brain and the body in general. But number 3 is you got to do some kind of brain fitness. That's where breathwork comes in. And we talk about mindfulness. And then for those people that look for rapid change, it's BrainTap. But you can do it. Obviously, what we do is we take all the ancient traditions. In fact, in India, Ames of Bhopal, it was funny because I went there and I took a guru up on stage and I measured his brain with the EEG. I said, that's a pretty good brain. He's got the perfect brainwave symmetry. I said, anybody here ever never meditate? So the guy raises his hand, I bring him on stage, I put a BrainTap on him. Within 7 minutes, he had the same brain as the guru. And they said, how did you do that? I said, because we don't learn the way you think we learn. We are superhuman in the way we think and breathe. When you learned a language, if someone's listening out there and you've learned more than one language, you have a circuit in your brain that never shut down. That means you can learn a third language better. If you only learned one language, the brain, again, is always trying to conserve energy. It shuts down that circuit. That's why it's so hard to learn languages. We didn't learn languages by looking at a book and repeating words one after another. We were immersed in that experience, in that theta brain that we have, absorbed that information, and then we sorted it out. We have a 100 billion neural bit processor. What it can do for us is no small thing. What we can do, but we have to tune into it. It will shut down on us if we think it's not good enough, not smart enough, all these negative sayings that people have. I always tell people you shouldn't shit all over yourself. You got to step up and realize, now you can't say this out loud, in public, but in front of the mirror in the morning when you're shaving or whatever you're doing, you should be telling yourself how great you are. Somebody should, and your subconscious needs to hear that. And, you just don't want to say it out loud in front of a group of people because then they think you're egotistical, but you should believe that for your life, your family, your friends, your coworkers, you are the best possible Frank, right? I'm the best possible Patrick. If not, then that's what you're going to work on. When somebody says, what should I work on? I said, if you do an inventory, be honest with yourself, you know what you need to work on, and you just work on the small things and the big things will take care of themselves.
What is the modern world? We have access to more information than ever. There's constant stimulation. I mean, I can remember growing up, my grandpa, I talk about him a lot. He was the calmest, gentle man, like Navy veteran, masculine, but at the same time, like just at peace. Like his nervous system, he was in full control, but he grew up in a completely different time. We're in a world and an environment with social media, overstimulation. We have access to more information than ever. People are going to hear this podcast. A handful of them will take one thing from it. But let's be honest, you and I both know most people are just going to hear this. It's going to go in one ear, out the other, and going to be looking for the next thing. It's almost that there's too much. What is this modern world, overstimulation, stress, dopamine, excess doing to the nervous system and rewiring our brains in real time?
Well, first of all, neuroscience says if we can get one new thought in today, Frank, we've won. Because one new thought, the whole brain has to rewire around a constellation of new ideas and concepts around that one thought. So that one thought has a cascade effect across their whole thought process. So hopefully we get one thought in there. That's my goal every time I give a talk. If I can get one new thought in there. Now, what's happening? They say that we have the attention span now of a goldfish, about six seconds. And and what they've actually shown, there was a study that I just read that says we're bombarded with 2,000 different food ads every day. That's the average American. And it's not food. They shouldn't even call it food. Most of it is not food. If the dogs won't eat it, then you shouldn't be eating it. If it doesn't make them, like they go, the dogs can't have chocolate. I go, well, that should be a sign. What's going on. Different things like that. So, but I think the main thing is that we're taught now that it's now and it's not entertainment anymore. They want to be educated and entertained at the same time. So when these teachers are up in school trying to teach, and they just got done playing whatever video game, they don't compare. There's one of my favorite sayings with my clients was, all unhappiness stems from unfavorable comparisons. So when you think about whatever you're unhappy about, it's probably because you're comparing yourself or someone else to this or that. And if you just stop comparing yourself. But in this day and age, they've made it so you can't have honest conversations with people. You either got to believe like me or you're something else. And it's like, no, everybody has their own beliefs, everybody has their own path. I don't really care what people do, just don't tell me what to do. You know what I mean? It's like we all have our own way. And I think now what's happening to our brains is we're being told where to go get information, we're being told what to think, but we're really missing out on that how to think equation. People need to challenge themselves. In order to keep that neuroplasticity, which really means energy in the brain, for people wondering, they used to think the brain was fixed, like we were like a record and the grooves were set by the time we were 7 and all we could do is run around in those grooves. What we found out now is it's the exact opposite. When we were born, and now I'll put this in energy equation for you. When we were born, our brains were operating at 18.1 volts. Okay. They were electric. We could think, we could act. We basically absorbed life. And within a couple of years, and I didn't notice this with my own kids, but my grandkids, I noticed it, they became little adults, in just overnight. It's like, how did they do that? And I still remember I put it in my first book. I've written 10 books, but the one book is called Awaken the Genius. And my dad had a friend, and the teacher came to him and said, I don't think little Jimmy can learn Spanish. He's not smart enough. And so the father, without missing a beat, said, can you teach him what the dumb kids learn in Spain? It's like people don't even think, they don't know how to think. It's not about, there's so many little exercises like that or lessons, and people need to challenge them, or what we call reframe those setbacks and those things. And if you're going through something right now, because what's really popular right now is, victimhood and, people, wanting to blame other things or other people on it, then just know that that's your schoolhouse right now. To get your superpower, just like everyone, you have to go through that dark cave and meet your father or whatever. You have to go through that stuff, because on the other end, guess what? You now have a skill. You have a very important capability that other people, I always say, now you have an ability. So now you have to respond to that ability. That means responsibility. Right? That's every superhero has, right? So when you think about every person out there, if everyone could step up and really take on their superhero persona, it'd be a whole different world out there, because you wouldn't be looking for other people to save you. You'd be saving other people. We already have enough people to save. I can tell you that. We need to wake up, and the heroes need to step up.
I'm glad you called out the victim kind of trauma culture. That's one thing I've spoken pretty openly about here on this podcast and in our other work here as well. It's across social media everywhere. And I haven't been able to pinpoint like what's the root of this, but I think you're the only other person I've heard actually like call it out. It's like there's this victim culture. So I'm really curious kind of like what is that rooted in?
Well, I think as soon as you become a victim, you have to rely on other people and other things. If one of the parts about waking up as a human is that you take responsibility for your successes and your failures. I mean, in one of the guys that was one of my mentors, he said, all those people you keep complaining about, those were your teachers. That's why they keep showing up. Until you learn from them, the universe is going to keep sending you teachers. So learn from it. It's my responsibility to do that. Now that I know it, first time, yeah, it's shame on them, like what they say. Second time, shame on me. And there's been some, so one of the things we did, just to put that in perspective, you hire somebody and you think they're going to change the world for you, and then you find out they're a turd, and you go, oh man, what am I going to do with this person? And so, but this person said, would you think you have to fire somebody? Fire them right away. And so we got back to the office, we fired them, and it was the best thing we ever did. We found out all this other stuff. I mean, your intuition, if you're the leader, be the leader, and sometimes it's not nice, but there's bigger things at play here. And mental health is super important, because as long as you have that stressor on, we have 100% energy. We wake up in the morning, 100% energy. What are you putting your energy on? Because that's who you're serving. Are you putting your energy on getting healthy, living a vibrant life, helping your community, your family, whatever? Those are all noble things, but are you spending your time going, oh, poor me? And I think people are getting rewarded for it. It's like, we used to call it stroking back in the 70s in psychology, where, if you can't get a positive stroke, you get a negative stroke, kids. So if you don't praise them, they're going to act out, so they get attention. There's different ways of looking at it. So I think in for whatever reason, our media loves victims, and so they play them up, like they parade them out there like ponies at a show or something, and then they just eat it up and they get their 15 minutes of fame, but then they don't see what that person goes through when they go home. It's being the victim takes a lot of energy. Just like I tell people, almost everybody, maybe not the guys on the call here, but the girls for sure, you'll get so upset, you'll just break down crying. And then after you get done crying, you got to take a nap. That's because that took a lot of energy. Remember, the body is like a transducer. It's holding energy and has to discharge. If we don't have a good way to discharge, that's why eating those good foods is a discharge. Exercise is a discharge. Doing mindfulness or BrainTap, whatever it is, that's a discharge. We need to keep the cells, those mitochondria, their whole job is to absorb light energy and transmit light energy as the form of codes through our DNA that tells us every 40 seconds who we are in this moment in time, not last moment, this moment. But so many people want to drag their past on with them. In the one book, I actually call it the dragons of the past, because people want to drag it on and drag it on and drag it on. And they wear it on their shoulder. They have a little badge that says, "This is me, poor me, I'm a victim." I have a chapter that says, I was blessed to be the son of an alcoholic, instead of, poor me, my dad was an alcoholic. I'm Irish, so I should be, have a beer here having this podcast. That's the way people think about Irishmen. But that doesn't have to be that way, right? You can change anything you want to change if you put the mindset to it, and then you take the action, because they say faith without works is dead. So you got to do the work.
Circling back to this positive affirmation, this kind of planning out, envisioning the day. You mentioned, you should kind of play the day out every single morning. You should also, maybe in the mirror every morning, look at yourself, that positive affirmation. Like, I think some people, they get robotic in nature though. So I'm curious, like, what role do our emotions play in this? You talked about the reticular activating system, like seeing the car. I've shared this within our group and community. Like, for the last 15 years, I never recognized that there was a Volkswagen Beetle on the highway. Like, I never saw it. And then one morning we're driving to church. We have my girlfriend, her 2 kids, and my niece is with us. My niece from the back seat, we pass a car. She punches me. She said, "Punch buggy, never punch back." And I'm like, oh my God, that's the game that we used to play when we were little kids. And we made it fun. And there was emotion brought into that experience. For the last 3 months, Dr. Porter, I've seen a Volkswagen Beetle every single day on the road, because now it's a playful game that I play with my girlfriend and her kids. But I know that it was the emotion, that it was playful and that was fun, that brought it to my attention, not just the fact that it was a car on the street. So as we're kind of mapping out, we're doing this positive affirmation, we're envisioning the day, what role does our emotional state play in that?
Everything. And I'll tell you how you change your affirmations so they actually work. The Hay House is publishing my next book, so they probably have the most experience in affirmations. But what I find is that if you don't really believe that affirmation, it's going to be dead energy. Like, you stand in front of the mirror and say, "I'm a millionaire," but then you can't make your house payment. So what you do is you say, "What would it be like if I was a millionaire?" Now you engage the subconscious mind. You engage the energy flow through the body. What car would I be driving? What would my relationships look like? What can I do with my money? All these. See, now you get energy flowing through the body. That's what's going to make your affirmations work. That works with the relationships. It works with your job. So we say you always start every affirmation with what, where, when, with whom, and how often. And if you use those words in front of every affirmation, instead of making it a statement of fact, because it's not fact right now, you're calling on the creative forces of your subconscious to put you in the right place, the right time, to do the right thing, to make the right decision. Because we all have opportunities. We have what we call psychological blind spots. These are blind spots we just have in our own thinking. But we also have a physiological blind spot. You probably went to the kitchen before and said, "Where's the salt shaker?" And it's not there. And then somebody comes out and says, "Here's the salt shaker." In psychology, we call that a stickoma, because it's after Jesus saying you can't see the sin in another with a stick in your eye. But we all have this. And you can take your hands in front of you and just do this, and you'll see when they disappear, you have a blind spot. Everybody has one. Keep your eyes focused forward and you'll see the blind spot. The hands will disappear and then they'll reappear. You have a natural blind spot. And so when we're looking at our life and all the opportunities we have, those affirmations, like you said, even the affirmation of seeing these Volkswagen Beetles, now it's in your reticular activating system. It's at what we would call in marketing the top of the mind. It's in the top of the mind awareness. So now it's something important that you look at. Now, so it's not, if it's not important, you don't even notice it. You're like, that's why, what they say, if they mind, it doesn't matter. If the mind over matters, is you have to have a interest in it for it to matter. If you told me somebody unfortunately got hit by a car somewhere in Tokyo and I didn't know their name, I'd say, yeah, that's sad. That's really bad. But I would have no emotional draw. But if you said somebody I knew, then I would have an emotional pain because now it hits the chord. And memories are tied to emotion. Emotion also drives behavior. So when you think about when you pull it, and also every one of your senses do this. So if I said, think of apple pie, what I think about is my grandma's house. She would always make apple pies and they were really delicious. So that memory comes up. So when you have different smells, it does that. We also do that with sounds. Like you might hear a song from your childhood that really is one of your favorites. And as soon as you're there, you're back camping or you're back with your buddy that you haven't seen in 20 years or whatever's going on, because those memories, it's like beads on a string. So we want to refresh those good memories. So not only in the morning, but at night, we call it adding to your success reel every night. Because every day you have small victories. And if you start categorizing those small victories, it'd be like those beetles that you're seeing. You'll start seeing more and more small victories, and those small victories lead to those bigger victories. And how you do that to add charge and emotion to it is you take those good memories and you make them bright and in vivid color. You step into them, you relive them, you act like a Hollywood producer, put music in the background. And any negative thing or setback that came in, you reframe it. I always tell people, put it in a picture frame, put it in black and white behind you. What lesson did you learn? So that the brain goes, that wasn't, anytime you say that something happened to you that was less than the best thing that could have ever happened to you, it takes down your morale. I mean, you can learn from losses just as well as victories. Now, you don't want to have too many losses. Obviously, hopefully you'll learn enough that, that you'll start to, just like we did when we learned to walk. Everything, in fact, Richard Bandler, one of my first trainers in NLP back in the early 80s, he said, anything worth doing well is worth doing terrible at first. But most of us aren't willing to fail. You've got to be willing to fail. You got to be willing to look ridiculous, and then what'll happen is the skill set, the muscle memory. Now, some people are natural athletes and they can just do it. I have a grandson that he fell out of the womb being able to do skateboarding and, baseball and football and all that. I mean, he's just a super athlete. And, I wasn't that way. I had to learn. I had to practice and lift weights and then when the other people were sitting on their butts, I passed them. That's the way that it works.
Yeah, that's my nephew. He was hitting baseballs being pitched at him when he was like 1.5, 2 years old. And I always joke with my sister that him and my brother-in-law like manifested him to be a baseball athlete, because when they made the announcement that he was a boy, they gave all of us baseballs and said, it's a boy. It's like so ironic. Like this kid, he literally believes that he is put on this earth to be a baseball player. It's incredible. He's 14 years old now, and it's really cool to kind of watch him develop and blossom. And the kid is an incredible gift. I love all of this. Sleep. Let's transition to sleep a little bit. How can somebody tell if their sleep is affecting their mental performance, and what is poor sleep actually doing hormonally and cognitively to the brain and body?
Well, during sleep, you go through all the cycles of the brain. So you're going to go from beta, where you're awake, which is going to make dopamine. You don't want that when you're sleeping. So you want to turn that off. You get into alpha and theta. Alpha and theta are going to make acetylcholine, norepinephrine. There's 54 different neurotransmitters, so I'm not going through them all. But the most important one is theta. It makes GABA. GABA is a precursor to DMT. That's why you dream. Like all these people doing all these psychedelics, we produce it we have the world's largest pharmacy in our head. It produces 30,000 different neurochemicals. So how do we activate it? We have to go through these brainwave frequencies. And I love it. I do a lot with biohackers, and I just was at Dave Asprey's event. And I always challenge them. I go, you can do whatever you want to get ready for sleep. I'm going to do BrainTap before sleep, and I'm going to beat you every time, because we took coal miners. Imagine this study we did, because they said, how are you going to help somebody? It's a circadian rhythm. I said, yeah, it is the circadian rhythm, because the light from the sun is telling our body what to do, but we can tell our body, because we're sovereign. We can tell our body what to do. So we took these coal miners. Before the study, we did 2 weeks of sleep preparation, measuring their sleep and everything. 10 hours was the average time they spent in bed. 10 hours. None of them had good sleep scores, because it's not about time in bed. That's one of the biggest lies people tell you about sleep. Longevity studies show 6.5 hours is perfect, optimum. But what really is optimum, if you can measure it, is 1 hour of deep sleep and 2 hours of REM sleep. If you do that, you will crush any Oura ring, any scintigraphy watch, anything like that. Yeah. So when you get, and that's the biggest thing BrainTap does, is we help people with sleep, because the sooner we can get you to that first cycle of delta, remember, that's when your brain starts detoxing. And 2/3 of the world right now isn't sleeping. So that means they have a toxic load. So what happens is now it's gonna leak out, just like we have leaky gut. Some people, if you've had somebody on that talks about that, well, we have a gut biome and we have a brain biome, and they're connected. They're not separate. So whatever's happening downstairs is happening upstairs. It's just you're not feeling it, but it'll show up as brain fog, lack of memory. Some people go, I'm having a senior moment. Well, I always tell people, don't say that, because I've not met an ancient culture yet, and I've been all over the world, that didn't put all of their tribal history with the elders. None of them go, you know what, all the tribal histories with the youngsters. They're with the elders. So what were they doing differently? They were taking care of their brain. They were using their brain for something more than, watching television and, doing just simple things. They were challenging their consciousness. They were challenging the world. They didn't know if they're going to live tomorrow. So they had a lot to, prepare for and plan for. They were thinking a little bit differently about their life than we are. So I think what's happening with lack of sleep, I mean, they took race car drivers. These are the best of the best. What they did was they kept them up. They only let them sleep 3 to 4 hours a night for 3 nights straight. They were driving like they had 2 drinks. So if you haven't slept in 3 days, you could be having you just get used to it, though. You start thinking that's normal. And as I told my grandson yesterday, you don't want to be normal.
What almost becomes a badge of honor for some people, right? It's like this grind mode, this grind mentality, like, work. I can sacrifice sleep. I'll make it up later. These 4 hours, like it becomes a badge of honor. People don't realize, because I think it's almost like the frog in boiling water effect, right? Like it slowly creeps up and it becomes your natural state and environment that you don't even.
Yeah. Most people don't realize what sleep does too. So you do more neurological work when you're sleeping than we are talking right now. Your brain is categorizing, organizing all your memories. It's putting together your timelines. It's predicting your future. It's justifying your past. It's doing all of that work, and it's also doing all the repair in your body. If you don't give your body a chance to do that, you can't make it up. The old saying about the guy that lived to be 99. He said, "Hell, if I knew I was going to live this long, I took better care of myself." You don't get that time back. You've got to take care of yourself now. So think of that. And this is another one I got from Alex Guerrero and Tom Brady. He said that for every 1 minute of exertion, you need 2 minutes of recovery, and you can count sleep in that. So during the day, we're exerting all the time. We're doing different things, doing podcasts or working on our car or running or exercising. All those exertions add up to minutes. Do we have time during the day to do some things? And we talked earlier, and we'll get into it. There's 3 different times of the day when you really need to do brain fitness, and they don't take long, but there's things you can do to keep your brain peaked during those times, because what you really want is peak performance moments, and when that moment passes, it's just like sleep. I can't go back and say, hey, you know what? I don't have time to sleep today. That's like these green credits they're buying. I'm going to pollute this area over here, so I'm going to buy this pristine acreage over here. No, they're going to pollute this area over here, and it's going to cause massive damage. So you can, and I was one of those guys. I didn't think you needed to sleep. You just got to go. And then I started reading the studies, and I'm going, that is the best biohack. If you can learn to sleep, you will move every neurological marker. You'll move every physiological marker. In fact, you burn more fat when you're sleeping than when you're exercising. So the first exercise I tell people, what's the first thing I should do? How's your sleep? That's the first exercise. Then the next exercise is going to get your body in shape so you can start doing some manual, some weights to get some muscle on your body. But if you're not sleeping, if you go there and try to lift weights, you're just going to get sore, angry, and upset. You're not going to have energy because it's an energy equation. And what I didn't finish earlier was now today, hopefully your brain is at around 10.1 volts. That's where it should remain until we leave the planet. Now, if that brain voltage, 7 to 14 is normal, but if it drops below 7, you're going to start to have dementia-like symptoms. If it drops to 4, you're going to have Alzheimer's-like symptoms. And we did a study in Florida with, these were women, 55 and 65 years old. They were all diagnosed with dementia. And now it's in 5 studies across the world, from Spain to Portugal to India to Brazil to the United States. We're going to have 100 people in this study. And so far, every person, before 5 weeks, they're off the dementia scale because we can get their brain voltage back over 7. As soon as we get their brain voltage back over 7, you have innate intelligence. Your brain knows what to do. I mean, you don't have to go ask Sister Barbara how to add 2 plus 2. I mean, it's there in your head. You already learned it. Your brain knows how to do those things. And memory is a tricky thing too. A lot of people think, I need to improve my memory. No, you have perfect memory. You have a recall problem. So just like your computer, every once in a while, you have to defrag the hard drive. That's what you're doing during sleep. Every night, you're consolidating, you're getting rid of the junk, you're taking care of those things. And whatever comes into your mind, just let it come into your mind. And a lot of people, unfortunately, do not sleep correctly. They think they're supposed to close their eyes and go to sleep. You should have about a 10-minute wind down period when you're in bed. And I recommend the 4-8 breath. It's a very simple breath. You breathe into the mental count of 4, and this will cause your sympathetic system to trigger. So you might get a little anxious at first, and then hold that breath, study that tension for just a moment, and then breathe out slowly to the count of 8. And as you breathe out, you'll notice that stress dissipates. And what I always tell people, it's like, think of it like mist on a lake and the sun's coming and the mist just fades away. And pretty soon what will happen is after about 10 or 15 of those breaths, you're just totally relaxed. Now, if you're still awake, what I always tell people, that's when you do your daily review. What happened to you today that was good? Let's see it in color. Let's relive it. Let's put it into the success reel. The subconscious will make it, if it's something really momentous, you'll remember it forever anyway. But you want to remember all those good times. Anything that was a setback or a failure or a negative statement, or you acted inappropriately, so what? Relive it. One of the things Bandler would say often too, and I did use it with all my clients over the last 40 years, is nobody deserves the penalty of only having one past. Your past is already a lie anyway, because you're distorting it, changing it, and manipulating it to support your current situation. I grew up with 8 brothers and sisters. So when I go to reunions, they tell me all the things that happened. I'm like, that didn't happen. What are you talking about? Because everybody had a different perspective on it. Well, every time you bring that memory up, you're also putting a new perspective on it. So let's bring it up and learn from that experience. And now it becomes an empowerment piece that makes you stronger. So you see the world differently, you hear the world differently, you feel with a sense of confidence that you can move into any situation and handle it, because hell, you've been through it. You've been, if you're 25, 30 years old now, you've been through a lot. You've got a lot of life lessons that you can add up and start using. And if you're older than that, you've got a lot. So you start putting all those assets together, just like any other good business plan. Know when you're going to use them. Start visualizing when you're going to use them on the timeline of your life. And that's what you do at night. And now you're going to start dreaming about those goals being achieved and focus only on those goals being achieved. You don't have to worry about how you're going to do it, because the subconscious takes care of all that. I mean, you can't have a dream without the capacity to learn the techniques, find a mentor that can teach you or something. You just have to be willing to put in the work, and you'll get there. I can't be Michael Jordan or something like that, but what I can do is I can go out there and have as much fun as he's having, and you kind of just have to reframe those things and then get that into the flow of your life, instead of thinking that life's against you. Life is working for you. It's conspiring with you for your success. It's, even though when it looks like a setback, the country song says, I thank God for unanswered prayers, because if when you think back on your past, that's what brought you here right now. This is the moment. And if you start to believe that this is the magical moment, this is the time of my life, today's the day, then what'll happen is that day will come, because now you're anticipating it, you're visualizing it, you're ready for it. And when it shows up, it might have already came and gone once, but believe me, it's like a ride at the county fair. It's going to come around again. You got a ticket and you're going to get on, no matter how much time it takes. Just stay vigilant.
Is a part of that daily recap and reflection, like, is that an important component to producing the new daily thought? You mentioned earlier on in the conversation, like a goal, a successful day is like we produced one new thought. And I think so many people, it's like they just have these cycles of repeated thoughts day in and day out. They're not taking time for reflection. They're constantly overstimulated. They're constantly on the go, 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 go. They're getting poor sleep. They got poor health because they're eating poor food. So is a fundamental piece of producing new thoughts to take time every day and kind of reflect upon the things that we learned, the thoughts that we had, the emotions that we experienced, to set us up, to install that memory, maybe produce it into a dream now state, but then also kind of free up some space the next day to produce these new thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. My new book's coming out with Hay House. It's called The Brain Fitness Blueprint. I go over that in there because we have a 30-day plan to help people think that way. Because I reframed habits, because people think of habits as a negative thing. Habits aren't all negative. You have some pretty good habits, but so let's change it to rituals. What's your ritual of brushing your teeth? What's your ritual of taking a shower? We all have a ritual. If something's out of place, we get a little irritated. If the toothpaste doesn't work, or if you can't find whatever, something's going on. Those are just the little things. But your brain is predicting everything about your future. In fact, one of the things I always shock people, I say, and I'll ask you, Frank, do you know which way a doorknob turns to walk through it when you go up to a doorknob to turn it?
Right.
See what you did? Your body knows, you don't know. They open both ways, but your brain goes ahead of you and says, look, the hinges are on the right. That turns to the right. Hinges are on the left. That one turns to the left, because you hardly ever make a mistake. But that's all being done by your subconscious. Now that's happening. That's not just with doorways. That's with meeting your family members, meeting your friends, meeting your coworkers, driving your car. And so when we find these patterns or these rituals we have in our life, we need to find the ones that are first the low-hanging fruit, the ones that are causing us the most damage, like in nutrition, of course. Get rid of sugar. That's the biggest neurotoxin there is. When I'm not saying you can't avoid it totally, because it's in everything and it's in fruit and things like that. But most people, they say at the turn of the century, the average American ate like 4 pounds of sugar in a whole year. Now we eat over 100 pounds. I'm wondering who's eating my 100 pounds. So it's like, but there are people, so think about, and that's what I said, you got to take an assessment of where you're at and be very honest with yourself. And that's why sometimes a coach works. When you have a coach or a group or a community you're working with, they can kind of shine the light on those things that you're not willing to shine on yourself. And then you don't have to admit it to them, but you can go home and admit it to your journal or admit it to your subconscious and start working. And the best time to work on it is either first thing in the morning or right when you're going to bed. Now, in the middle of the day, when we talk about brain fitness, that's just a recharge to get you going, because you want to be your best self for your, we have a job. Hopefully most people only work 8 hours a day. If you're self-employed, a joke I told my son, I said, when you're self-employed, you only work half days. And I bought him a franchise, and he was working 4 hours a day. And I said, Alex, what are you doing? He said, well, you said you only have to work half days. I said, no, I meant what half? 12 hours. It's not half days like 8 hours. But think about that. Most people think their job is who they are. Your job, or however you make your income, should give you the financial ability to do whatever the hell you want. And that's when you have a life. You don't have a life because you have a job. You have a life because you have resources that allow you to do things when you're not on the job, unless your job is that kind of life, and you love it and that's what you do. But most people, when I had my franchise company, we had 108 locations. One of the questions we asked, do you like your job? And I could probably count on one hand out of the thousands of people we saw through the franchise, people who said they loved their job. Now, these were people looking for therapy. So, but I mean, if you're doing something 8 hours a day that you don't like, then take that other 4 hours and learn a new skill, a new craft, a new business. Because as long as you have a roadmap in your mind of something better, the longest trip can seem like an instant, because you have milestones and you're achieving things and you're getting those dopamine hits and you're energized and you're reading new books and you're doing all these things, But if you don't have if you're just saying, oh God, I got to go, there's more heart attacks on Monday morning than any other day of the week. And the main reason, I think, is because people don't want to go to work. They have to start the week out. There weren't as many heart attacks on Monday morning during COVID because people didn't have to go in the office. So there were still a lot of heart attacks because that's the biggest cause of death, besides malfeasance, things of that nature. But so I mean, people, if you think about it, we have these powerful minds. If we can start to train them during the day, because we have to interrupt those rituals or those patterns.
Are those the 3 times of the day? Then you tease it up a little bit earlier that there were 3 specific times you should be doing this brain fitness. Is it morning, evening, and then finding some time mid-afternoon to do this brain fitness?
Yeah, and they're all training different brain waves. Because some people go, well, I meditate, I don't need that. Well, meditation doesn't do the same thing. We've measured over 30,000 brains, and most people actually do more damage to their brain when they're meditating because their default mode network never shuts off. That monkey mind keeps playing, and they don't realize that those thoughts are manifesting into the things they see, hear, and experience in the world around them. Not literally manifesting, but those are what they see. Those are those Volkswagen Beetles they see, when there could be, Mercedes Benz and, Jaguars and things like that. They're not seeing them because they're not in their filter.
I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Caroline Leaf's work around neuroplasticity. I had her on. I've had her on a couple times. One of our conversations, we got deep into the difference between the mind and the brain. Now, you've used both words here today, both mind and brain. I'm just curious if you can maybe kind of give some clarity in your definition. Are you using them interchangeably, or do you kind of fall into her definition where the brain is the structure, the physical component of what sits within our brain? And then she describes the mind as more of this energetic state that kind of radiates almost like the energy around us. So can you give some clarity? Because you've used them a couple times, and I just need to know kind of for myself.
Think of your body as your brain. It's not just the brain between your ears. Every cell is thinking. We have a thinking immune system. We have a thinking nervous system. Everything is thinking. So that's the hardware. So we have to keep the hardware. We have to keep that energy up. So if when I was in school, we could get a potato and we'd go Keener 14. I was in Battle Creek, Michigan, and that was the radio station. I could put in the potato, put a speaker on it. I could actually pick up that radio station because that crystal was in there. So every cell is like a little crystal. In fact, they actually now know that every cell sings. It has its own tone. You have your own frequency and tone. So there's a lot of spooky things they're finding out in science now that people used to think were like crazy woo-woo stuff, but they're becoming real. Now that energy field she's talking about, that's the mind. So the mind is what interfaces or interacts with it. You're not your mind. You're not your body. Because when you die, they did studies and you lose 3/4 of an ounce. I want to know what the 3/4 of an ounce is. That's who we are. Nobody's been able to find it. Because if I lose my arm, I'm still Patrick. I just don't have an arm. But if I lose my head, of course, that would be a different story. But, that's our interface. So think of the mind as our interface with consciousness. And there's a reason, this is something also maybe your listeners don't know, but if one mice runs a maze in a lab, they can't use that maze in any other lab in the world because every other mouse knows that maze. So how did the other mice know that maze? How did Bannister run the 4-minute mile, and then 2 years later, high schoolers are running the 4-minute mile? Because it's not just radio stations broadcast, there's frequencies. They now know that our DNA, 80 billion miles of DNA that's wrapped around every cell of your body right now, its whole job, it's a crystalline structure. It absorbs light energy and transmits it as codes to your body to tell you how to show up. If you show up as a positive person, your best self shows up. If you're a negative person, your lesser self shows up. Just like Henry Ford said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Neuroscience is proving that he was perfectly right, because even the mechanics of our body work against us when we start thinking negatively. And it takes a lot more energy. I mean, it's a lot easier to smile and laugh and have a good time than it is to be so down and out all the time and think the world's against you.
I didn't think I was going to go here today with you, but this almost sounds like the scientific argument for what I would call God, but some people would maybe define as a divine intelligence or a super consciousness. I'm curious if you don't mind me asking you a personal question here. Like, would you describe yourself as a man of faith, or do you have a spiritual life component? Because what we're saying here, I think, is direct pointing to that.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between spirituality and religious. There are a lot of religious people that have no spirituality. I think I was brought up Catholic, so they say once you're born Catholic, you're Catholic for life. But I believe that I think every religion has its good points. It's the people running them that have the problems typically, and when you think about, and when I studied Hinduism, because I studied all the ancient traditions and I work with Ames Bhopal, which is MIT of India, They actually changed their neurocenter to the BrainTap neurocenter, which is kind of cool. Because I proved out all their ancient traditions with I developed a piece of technology called NeuroCheck. I can actually measure your body 9 different parameters within 5 minutes, and it's 100%, where the Aura ring that I wear is 60%. But because they didn't go to the people that own the patent on heart rate variability. I did. I went to the people that actually, the cosmonaut program is who made it. So, but when you think about our bodies, the Hindus believe that our body is designed for enlightenment. And so I've had a few things happening, and I'll tell the listeners just one of them here that shocked me. There's a technology out there called radionics. It uses frequencies. Now there's a lot of frequency devices out there. People use them. We use solfeggio frequencies, right frequencies, and Nogier frequencies. But this radionics, what they did was they took these seeds from Monsanto that grow only one seed, right? They changed the seeds. They GMO'd them so that you have to buy the seeds every year. What these guys did is they found the frequency of the original seed. They broadcast that frequency on these seeds. They became heirloom seeds again. And I said, that's us. Imagine if we could eat the right foods, get the right exercise, get the right sunshine, the right air, our body, and just like they found this new glial lymphatic system, there's other systems in the body that haven't been activated yet. We're just getting started. There's going to be so much more out there. And I think that, when they say, the sunlight isn't separated from the sun, a wave isn't separated from the ocean, we're not separated from God. We just sometimes pretend we're not. And some people, so there's no atheist in a foxhole, they say. So, when you think about, so what I always tell people is there's a power greater than you. Like while we've been sitting here, just this time we've been sitting here, every 40 seconds, every DNA appear in your body changed. Your heart beat over 86,000 times during that time or more. You breathed over 21,000 times. You blinked your eyes at least 12,000 times. All these things happened, and you digested your food, and the metabolism's working. Literally, trillions of things are happening. It's not you. It's a power greater than you. So even if you don't believe in God, you have to believe there's a power greater than you. It's not coincidence, because they've done the math. We can't be here. There's no reason or rationale for us to be here on Earth. They can't figure it out. There's no math equation that says man should have evolved and did what it did to be where we're at right now.
Powerful. Wrap it up here. A couple more minutes. I want to drive it home and obviously point the guys where they can, learn more about the BrainTap. Obviously, purchase one if they're available, and just continue to follow you in your work. Kind of last question before we get to all that. A lot of our listeners are looking to, maybe grow in discipline, grow in self-confidence, maybe even, find deeper meaning and purpose. Is it possible, to train our brain to crave some of those things? And if so, what is, maybe one step that a guy can take here, leaving this conversation to kind of...
Yeah. The first thing is to do, if you don't have the BrainTap, there's the 3 breath works I recommend during the day. First one in the morning is a psychological breath. Just get up and you breathe in as deeply as possible, and you just let it go. And you'll feel, like you've probably seen a pet or a dog or cat shake. Sometimes they're shaking their nervous system. We need to get our nervous system shooken up. Our lymph system gets stuck. And so that psychological breath will also do the same thing as a cup of coffee. It will create dopamine, cortisol, and norepinephrine, and you'll be ready to roll. You'll be ready to go. And then remember during the day to catch yourself if you're not breathing. In the middle of the day, I recommend you do the box breathing. And I always say, if it's good enough for the Navy SEALs, it's good enough for, you to do. I mean, imagine you're one of 6 guys, you're going to go take on this battleship. I'm sure you got a lot of stress going on, and it's really easy. You just breathe in the count of 4, you hold it to the count of 4, you breathe out to the count of 4, you hold it out to the count of 4, and you do that for about 5 minutes. And what'll happen is your nervous system will balance out. It'll recharge your nervous system, because we're lacking oxygen, because we're under stress. And remember, the stress doesn't just come from psychological stress. We have a lot of environmental stresses now, with lights and EMF and all these other things, pollutions and things like that. So your body's constantly keeping balance. While you're doing your thing, the body's got to keep doing its thing. And then at night, before you go to bed, you do the one that I showed earlier, the 4-8 breath. If they do that, that's one thing they can start doing right now. And that will change because if you change your physiology, I always tell people, if you put your shoulders back, your chin up, and you go and you try to feel bad, it's virtually impossible. You have to jump your shoulders and put your head down. You've got to get into the physiological state of depression to be depressed. So don't get into that state. When I was a kid watching baseball, the Tigers, my brother, one of us would have to hold on to the rabbit ears, while we could watch it, because we didn't have all these stations like people do now. I mean, we had 2 stations, and if you had somebody had to stand there because we were in such a remote area, but we could watch it as long as someone's there, because we had to that's what we have to do with our body. We have to tune into that frequency. So every morning you should say, wow, today is a new day. I get to discover who I am. What did I learn? Yes, you're smarter than yesterday. You're showing up with greater skills. You anticipate the future. Deepak Chopra says 97% of what's going to happen to you tomorrow, we know about today. So I always tell people, what are you pretending not to know? You already know what's going to happen tomorrow. Plan for something different. If something's not working for you, rehearse something different. You can make mistakes in your head and not pay the consequences. So make them in there, get really good at it. So when you get in the real world and you get into the real drama of life, you just naturally do it, because the subconscious doesn't know the difference, or the body, if you will. The body doesn't know the difference between real or imagined. So the brain just responds to what thoughts it's input into it. It's just an input machine. We control the mind, but if we don't control the mind, it will control us. It will have us thinking negative thoughts, because unfortunately the average person has 60,000 thoughts a day, and 80% of them are negative. And that's not because they're negative. It's because of our upbringing. You also have 7 generations. The Hopi Indians said this, 7 generations forwards and backwards. Now neuroscience is saying that they actually did a study with mice, and they actually had sandalwood. And when they put the sandalwood down, the mice would jump. They taught them to do that. They waited 5 generations, never taught them to do the sandalwood thing. They put the mice down, they put the sandalwood down, those mice started jumping. No training. It was already in their DNA. So what mom and dad did, mom and dad did, mom and dad did, mom and dad did, all the way back. So sometimes we have to think, is that me? I know if you're married, like I am, my wife will remind me, you're acting like your dad again, or you're acting like, but we have mirror neurons in every cell. Those that's why when we watch a movie, we become, Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, or we become, whatever it is, or we become the victim if that's who we like to play, and we get scared and things like that, because those mirror neurons are working either for us or against us. So, I think when you start setting yourself up to say, hey, I am the lead in my play. I'm the writer of the script, and it's okay to fail. I don't have to win every time. All streaks come to an end anyway. So at some point, I don't know, there's no football team that's kept winning forever and ever and ever. I know there's some teams that do it a lot, but and there's no baseball teams that have won forever and ever and ever. You get these streaks going. So we'll have streaks, and then you'll have a letdown. Then you'll have streaks, and you have a letdown. Hopefully you have more streaks than you have letdowns. That's what you're hoping for.
So much great stuff here today, guys. We want you to check out Dr. Porter's work. Where's the best place to connect with you? Obviously, website, books, Instagram, social media.
Yeah, if the new book's coming out, the Brain Fitness Blueprint, it's available now on Amazon and other, like all those stores online. Hay House is coming out with it in October, but they can pre-order it. But I have 9 other books that are out there. But they can go to BrainTap, and they can actually download that app for free for 14 days. In those 14 days, most people, 90% of people will start sleeping well that very first night. So even without the headset, and then you can, because we have 120,000 users. So if the person doesn't have, most of them don't have the headsets, because they're around the world. So sound is very powerful. The sound was what happened first, right? God said, let there be light. He said it, but light's important because it energizes the cells and gives energy in that ATP. But if you just want to test out some brain fitness protocols, they're there, and I have a 21-day quick start for you that I've already wrote, and it's in there.
Awesome, guys. We'll have all that plugged down there in the show notes for you. If you're going to go deeper, try out the 14 days, pick up the books, pre-order the one that's coming up. Last and final question here, Dr. Porter. We end it with the same question every single time. Title of the show, obviously, is called The Superhuman Life. You mentioned we're all superhuman to a certain degree. If we can tap into these brain states and get control of our mind and our mental fitness, how would you define living a superhuman life?
I think it's being able to do whatever you want to do when you want to do it without question. And there's either excuses or results. And if you're not getting results, then go find out what you need. Go find your mentor, go find your book, go find your seminar, go find your training, because it's really about learning. When you start learning, you start rotting, so just keep going. And I think a superhuman also knows that they don't know all the answers. Nobody has all the answers. There's always somebody out there that's smarter and you can learn something from. So I'm always looking for those people myself. So.
Love it, guys. We appreciate you hanging out with us here today. For Dr. Patrick Porter, your host, Coach Frank Rich here, guys. Check out the BrainTap, check out the books, and start getting control of both your hardware and your software, your brain and your mind. But until next time, we love you guys. We'll see you in the next one.